The first thing you need to know is this: nothing in Maple Ridge ever really happens fast. It's the kind of suburb where time moves at the speed of a slow sprinkler head. Click, click, hiss, while retired folks in cargo shorts wave from driveways like they're signaling aircraft on a carrier deck. It's peaceful, predictable, almost suspiciously calm. But if you'd been there the morning this story began, you'd have felt something in the air. Not drama, not danger, just that quiet, suburban hum that says, someone's about to do something petty. That's why when I look back on what happened, I always start with the sound. Because before the letters, before the meetings, before Karen made the biggest mistake of her HOA career, everything began with the soft electric whir of a little boy's mobility scooter rolling down the sidewalk. Evan Allen loved that scooter more than some kids love their bikes. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But it gave him something every kid deserves: freedom, independence, the ability to get to the community pool without being carried, or to the corner where the ice cream truck made its slow, jingly crawl. He'd named the scooter Thunderbolt, which was funny, because it moved at the speed of a determined turtle. But to him, it was everything. And every morning, like clockwork, he would glide gently down the walkway in front of their home while the neighborhood woke up around him. I swear, that kid had the brightest smile in the county. The kind that could have powered half the Christmas lights in Maple Ridge if the HOA ever allowed anything as bold as multicolored. Inside the house, his father, Mike Allen, brewed coffee the same way he approached life. Slow, steady, and quiet. Mike had the posture of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. Former Army Commando, medically retired after too many deployments and too much shrapnel in too many places. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't the type to pound his fist or raise his voice. He carried silence the way other men carried egos. If you walked past his garage that morning, you'd have smelled fresh-cut cedar from his woodworking bench. Mike liked fixing things, liked order, liked the kind of simplicity you only appreciate after you've spent far too much time in places where life is anything but simple. And above all, he liked watching his son do that small, gentle loop around the cul-de-sac that made the world seem normal. Sprinklers hissed. Birds chattered. The mail truck did its lopsided crawl. It was peaceful, almost suspiciously so, the way calm water sometimes hides a big alligator underneath. Enter Karen Pickett. No one actually invited Karen into that morning, but she arrived anyway, as all HOA presidents do. Unannounced, unwanted, and holding a clipboard like it was a sword forged in the fires of petty bureaucracy. You could spot her 3 blocks away by the way she marched, chin high, elbows sharp, hair sculpted into that unmistakable geometric "I want to speak to your manager" arrangement. She was Maple Ridge's self-elected guardian of conformity. If she could have issued traffic citations, she would have campaigned for it. If she could have banned laughter after 6 p.m., she would have fought for a unanimous vote. And if she could have controlled the clouds to make sure they cast HOA-approved shadows, she would have filed the paperwork twice. Her superpower? Spotting violations before most people spotted breakfast. So when she glanced down Maple Ridge Lane and caught sight of Evan's scooter, bright red, with a slightly chipped front panel and a custom sticker that said, Thunderbolt, she froze like she'd just witnessed a felony. To be fair, she had been looking for something to enforce. It was Thursday, and she hadn't written up a violation all week. She stared at that scooter like it was a 4-wheeled apocalypse. Then, with the solemnity of a judge sentencing society to death, she marched straight toward the Allen house. Evan didn't notice. He was too busy turning the scooter's slow corner like a pilot in an air show. But Mike did. He saw Karen's figure through the garage window, and he sighed. Not annoyed, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing someone is about to make your day inconvenient. Karen reached the driveway and cleared her throat the way people do when they want full attention. Good morning, Mike said politely, because his mother raised him right. Even when facing danger, Karen sniffed the air like she was inspecting it for contaminants. Mr. Allen? She began, gripping her clipboard with the enthusiastic tension of someone who loves rules a little too much. We have a situation. Mike glanced over toward Evan, who was humming to himself, circling the mailbox. A situation. Mike repeated slowly. Yes, she said. An unapproved motorized vehicle is being operated on HOA-governed pathways. That, she jabbed her pen in Evan's direction, is against regulations. There were many ways Mike could have responded. He could have laughed. He could have snapped. He could have told her what actual situations look like, the kind involving smoke and sand and helicopters. But he just took a sip of his coffee and calmly said, "That's my boy's mobility scooter." Karen blinked, unbothered by context. "Well, it is an unapproved motorized item. It's medical equipment," Mike clarified. "It has wheels. And a battery," she countered, as if describing a bomb. Mike stared at her, waiting to see if she would realize how ridiculous she sounded. She didn't. "Look," she said with a pained smile. "I'm simply enforcing the rule. Section 14B, no motorized vehicles on common property. That was written for ATVs," Mike reminded her. "Rules are rules," she said, which for her was scripture. And that was when Evan rolled up, slowly, dramatically slowly. "Hi, Miss Pickett," he chirped, cheerful as a sunrise. Karen smiled back with the expression of someone meeting a tax audit. "Hello, dear. I'm afraid your little machine is causing some issues." Evan blinked. He didn't understand. Why would he? It was his legs on wheels. "Daddy?" he asked. "It's fine, bud. Go inside for a minute." Evan didn't argue. He trusted his dad the way all kids trust people who fix everything. When the front door closed, Karen handed Mike a letter, folded crisply, aggressively, with unnecessary precision. "This is your official notice," she announced. Mike unfolded it. The words were sharp enough to cut paper. Violation notice. Unapproved vehicle. He stared at the letter, then at her, then back at the letter. And he did the one thing that really annoyed people like Karen. He didn't react. He just said, "All right." Karen seemed confused. She wasn't used to compliance without a struggle. "Good," she said stiffly. "Please handle this promptly." She turned and marched away, satisfied like she'd just saved the neighborhood from an uprising. Mike watched her go, then watched his son peek through the blinds. As he walked inside, letter in hand, the sprinklers clicked twice, then hissed again, like even they were sighing. And that right there, that folded, perfumed, overly important notice, was the moment everything changed. Because for the first time since he'd moved to Maple Ridge, Mike Allen felt something stir in his chest. Not anger, not outrage, something quieter, more patient, more dangerous, the kind of feeling that means someone is about to learn a very important lesson. A lesson taught not with fists, but with documents. And this was only the beginning. It started the very next morning. Most folks in Maple Ridge spent Fridays easing into the weekend. Kids waited for the school bus. Retirees walked tiny dogs with names like Muffin or Colonel Pickles. Coffee mugs steamed on porches while neighbors traded weather predictions like they were stock tips. Ordinary stuff. But this particular Friday at precisely 8:02 a.m., an envelope appeared on the Allens' doorstep. Pink envelope, lavender-scented, tri-folded into a perfect weapon of passive aggression. Mike found it on his way back from taking the trash cans out. He picked it up, held it between two fingers like it might bite him, and sighed. There was no mistaking that perfume. Karen was the only person in the subdivision who believed mail should smell like a Bed Bath & Beyond threw up. He opened the letter carefully, mostly because her folds were sharp enough to slice skin, and read, "Second notice. Unapproved motorized vehicle. Fine issued. $125. Compliance required immediately." He read it twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Compliance with what? The scooter wasn't even on the sidewalk. It was inside the garage, sitting there quietly like a well-behaved houseplant. He walked inside and placed the letter on the kitchen counter. "Another one?" Evan asked, already knowing the answer. "Yep," Mike said, rubbing the back of his neck. "What did I do this time?" Evan asked, sipping his juice box. "Existing," Mike answered mildly. Evan snorted. Figures. That was the thing about Evan, they had the same humor gene. the one that laughed at absurdity instead of letting it ruin their day. But even he didn't know what was coming next. Mike withdrew the scooter from the garage and wheeled it onto the porch to see if that was what Karen meant by immediate compliance. Maybe she thought it was too close to the sidewalk. Maybe she thought it was on the sidewalk. Hard to guess when you lived under the rule of Maple Ridge's self-appointed queen of regulation. He placed it neatly in the corner. Perfectly. Not an inch out of place. And that's exactly when Karen rounded the corner like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Mr. Allen," she called out, waving her clipboard aggressively. "Good morning." Mike nodded politely. "Morning. I see you received our compliance notice," she said brightly, as if she were offering a coupon instead of a fine. "I did." He folded his arms. "What exactly is the violation now?" She tapped the scooter with the tip of her pen. "This is an unapproved motorized medical equipment," Mike corrected. No, she said, shaking her head with the self-assured confidence of someone who read one paragraph of the bylaws once in 2007. "It has a battery, which means it qualifies as a vehicle." "My son can't walk long distances," Mike reminded her calmly. "This is his mobility device." "It has a horn," she said, ignoring everything he'd just said. "Vehicles have horns. Toys have horns. Mobility devices don't." Mike blinked. That's not how anything works." But Karen didn't hear him. She was busy writing something on her clipboard with furious, righteous scribbles. Behind her, neighbor Gary peeked over his hedge, eyebrows raised high enough to qualify for orbit. "I don't make the rules," Karen added, which was ironic because she absolutely did, and everyone knew it. "You enforce them selectively," Mike replied evenly. Karen froze, as if someone had slapped her with a wet towel. "Selective? Me?" she gasped dramatically, one hand on her chest like she'd been personally attacked. Mike didn't respond. He didn't have to. Over Karen's shoulder, they both heard a rumbling noise. A neighbor riding a gas-powered lawnmower across the shared green space. Loud, smoky, violent. Everything the HOA supposedly hated. Karen didn't even glance at it. Selective? Oh yes, intensely, professionally, possibly religiously. Later that afternoon, Karen elevated things. Because petty people don't get tired, they get inspired. At 3:12 p.m., she marched back across the street with 2 additional board members in tow. Janice, who somehow smelled like boiled cabbage. And Dale, who always looked like he wasn't totally sure why he was there. "Mr. Allen," Karen announced loudly, as if giving a press briefing. "We are here to formally present a community hazard notice." Mike stared. "For what?" "For storing an unapproved vehicle in a visible area." "It's on my porch," he said slowly. "Yes," Karen said, nodding with deep seriousness. "Your porch is visible." "It's supposed to be visible," Mike replied. "It's attached to my house." Karen didn't blink. Porches fall under community aesthetic standards. "And what exactly," Mike asked, "is una aesthetic about a scooter?" Janice piped up. "It's red." "So is your roof," Mike countered. Janice deflated. Dale cleared his throat. "We don't want trouble. We just need the rules followed." Mike looked at him. "All of the rules?" Dale hesitated. That tiny pause told Mike everything he needed to know. Karen jumped back in before Dale could implode under the weight of his own conscience. "This is your formal warning," she said, handing him yet another letter. Mike accepted it, but something shifted in his posture. Not aggressive, not even defensive, just calculating. He'd been patient. He'd been polite. He'd been every version of reasonable. But as the 3 HOA officials marched back to their lair, Mike noticed something on the community bulletin board. A bright yellow sign reading, "New policy. Fines double after second notice. Effective immediately." The date? Today. Convenient. Suspiciously convenient. But the real escalation didn't come until later that evening, when Mike was out back mowing the lawn and Evan was sitting on the porch with a soda. They were enjoying the ordinary peace of a warm Friday, the sky turning coral pink, the cicadas buzzing lazily, when a commotion broke out near the sidewalk. Two HOA maintenance staff in reflective vests walked toward the porch. "We're here for the vehicle," one said. "What vehicle?" Mike asked. "The motorized unit," the second man clarified. Evan's eyes widened. "My scooter." Before Mike could respond, Karen appeared behind them like she'd teleported. "Per policy," she announced, "the vehicle must be impounded until proper authorization is obtained." "It's not a vehicle," Mike said sharply for the first time. "Medical equipment," Evan whispered. Karen crossed her arms. "It's being removed for safety." And before Mike could stop them, the two workers lifted the scooter, awkwardly, clumsily, without care, and began hauling it toward the truck. "Be careful," Mike warned, stepping forward. They weren't. One misstep, one slip, one poorly timed shift, and the scooter slid off the loading ramp. It hit the ground with a painful metallic crunch. The front wheel bent sideways. Plastic shattered. The motor made a dying whine and went silent. Evan gasped. Then he cried. Not a loud cry. A small one. The kind that hurts more. Mike froze. Not in fear. Not in shock. But in that cold, dangerous stillness soldiers learn in places where quick reactions save lives. Karen, unbelievably, said, "Well, maybe now he can learn to walk." Gary dropped his gardening hose across the street. Janice covered her mouth. Even Dale whispered, "Karen." But Karen didn't flinch. Mike said nothing. Not a word. Not a breath wasted. He crouched beside his son, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "Go inside, bud." And Evan did. The workers fumbled with the broken pieces, unsure what to do next. Karen adjusted her blazer like she'd just accomplished something noble. Mike stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't rage. He simply said, in a voice so calm it made the hairs on every neck stand up, "All right." Then he walked inside. And just like that, the petty wars stopped being petty. Because the very next chapter? That's when things started getting interesting. Very, very interesting. Mike didn't sleep that night. Not because he was angry. Anger is loud, messy, unpredictable. What he felt was far quieter, far sharper. The kind of quiet that comes before a controlled detonation. The kind of quiet you only learn after years of being trained to act with precision, not emotion. Evan had cried himself to sleep. The broken remains of his scooter sat in the garage on an old moving blanket, bent and shattered in ways that made it useless. The porch light above it flickered gently, as if offering condolences. And somewhere across the street, Karen slept soundly in her perfectly beige house, utterly unaware that she had just crossed a line most people with common sense, and half a conscience, would never even approach. Mike sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, a cup of cold coffee untouched beside him. A thick 3-ring binder lay open in front of him, pages spread across the table like a battlefield map. Bylaws, regulations, amendments, addendums, footnotes written by people with too much free time. The HOA rulebook. He'd read entire stacks of military logistics documents that were easier to understand. There were sections about grass blade height, appropriate holiday decor duration, and a deeply concerning subsection about neighbor harmony expectations. But somewhere in that chaos, hidden among the nonsense, were the weapons he needed. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for leverage. Around 2 a.m. he found it. 3 things, actually. One was an obscure ADA accommodation clause the HOA had never updated. Another was a contradiction in the vehicle policy that rendered half the rule unenforceable. And the third, his favorite, was a requirement that all HOA officers must be in compliance with all regulations at all times. Mike leaned back and let out a slow, controlled breath. "This'll do," he murmured. He wasn't smiling. People often mistake quietness for weakness. But there are 2 types of quiet. The quiet before someone gives up, and the quiet before someone begins. Mike was definitely the second kind. By sunrise, he had a plan. Not a loud plan. Not a dramatic plan. Nothing involving shouting matches or fistfuls of ripped-up letters thrown dramatically into the air. No. This was going to be a paperwork plan. Politely devastating plan. The kind of plan that suffocates tyrants through their own obsession with rules. Around 7 a.m., he woke Evan for school. The boy's eyes were puffy, but he still tried to smile. "Is Thunderbolt going to get fixed?" he asked. "Yes," Mike said simply. "And better than before." "Karen said it was a violation," Evan whispered. Mike crouched down so they were eye level. "Buddy, she was wrong. And when grown-ups are wrong, there are ways to fix it. Good ways. Smart ways." Evan nodded, trusting him completely. As soon as the bus pulled away, Mike returned to the kitchen, pulled his laptop from the drawer, and began typing. The first document was a formal ADA accommodation request. The second was a complaint to the County Disability Services office. The third was a property damage claim addressed directly to the HOA's insurance provider. The fourth, a beautifully crafted, extremely polite masterpiece, was an official request for a compliance audit of the HOA board. He didn't embellish. He didn't exaggerate. He documented. Precisely, calmly, professionally. He even included timestamps. Soldiers are trained to do that. At 9:15 a.m., as if summoned by the scent of rule enforcement, Karen strutted across the street again, clipboard in hand, chin high, shoes clicking like the approach of an approaching villain in a sitcom. She didn't bother knocking. She rang the bell twice sharply, like the house owed her punctuality. Mike opened the door slowly. Karen wasted no time. "We received a complaint that your scooter was obstructing common access yesterday." "It's destroyed," Mike said flatly. "Yes, well," she said, waving that away like it was a minor spilled drink. "Perhaps this is a learning opportunity for your child." Mike didn't flinch. "It was medical equipment." Karen exhaled loudly. "Everything is medical equipment these days. Kids are resilient. He'll adapt." "Now, about the fine." "There won't be a fine," Mike said calmly. Karen blinked. "I'm sorry," I said. Mike repeated, "There won't be a fine." Karen squared her shoulders. "The board has already approved it." "Wrong," Mike said simply. "They can't approve a fine based on a rule they are currently violating." There was a satisfying 3-second pause. "A what violation?" she stammered. Mike held up a printed page of the HOA's own rules. Section 12. Officers must be in full compliance at all times, including landscaping, paint upkeep, and property markers. Karen's face paled. She knew. Oh, she knew. Mike continued. "Your backyard fence is 3 inches over the allowed height. Your porch light is not the approved style listed in the amendment from 2015. And your front step has a chip tile, which you have failed to repair within the required 14-day grace period." Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Well, those are minor issues. All violations are enforced equally," Mike said. "Your rules, not mine." It was the calmness that unnerved her. The way he didn't raise his voice. The way he didn't lose his patience. The way he simply held her accountable using her own system. I'll have to bring this to the board," she muttered, stepping backward. "You do that," Mike said. She left, fast. But Mike wasn't done. At noon, he received an email from the HOA. Actually, several. Urgent. ADA complaint received. Notice. Request for emergency hearing. Alert. Compliance audit in progress. Action required. Submit accident report. He didn't respond to a single one. They weren't addressed to him. They were all addressed to Karen. Later that afternoon, neighbor Linda knocked on the door with a casserole. "You all right?" she asked. "Fine," Mike said, because he was. "I heard." She lowered her voice. "What happened to the scooter?" Mike nodded once. "And I saw Karen earlier," Linda added. "She looked like she was trying to swallow a lemon whole." "That'll continue," Mike said, almost absent-mindedly, as he slid another printed document into a neatly organized folder. Linda blinked. "You're not yelling, or throwing things, or calling the police." "No need," Mike said. "I have the rules." Linda slowly smiled. "Oh, honey." She messed with the wrong dad. Around 4 p.m., Evan returned home. Mike walked him into the garage, lifted the blanket, and showed him Thunderbolt's broken pieces. "It's okay, buddy," he said softly. "We're going to fix this, and we're going to do it right." Evan nodded, wiping his eyes. Karen watched from across the street through her blinds. Of course she did. And she saw something she didn't understand. Not anger, not revenge. Determination. Quiet determination. That night, Mike filled out the last form. An official request for a full review of the HOA's enforcement policies, citing overreach, discrimination, and misuse of authority. He clicked, submit. Then he closed his laptop. Tomorrow would be interesting, but tonight, he simply said goodnight to his son, turned off the porch light, and felt the entire neighborhood holding its breath. Because even though no one said it out loud, everyone could tell. The line in the sand had been drawn, and Karen had crossed into territory she had no idea how to navigate. What she also didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Mike's plan had only just begun, and the next 48 hours would unravel the HOA more spectacularly than anyone could have predicted. The meltdown didn't start with an explosion. It started with a whisper, one of those delicious suburban whispers that slips from lawn to lawn faster than fertilizer runoff. By sunrise the next day, the entire neighborhood knew something had happened between Mike Allen and the HOA. And because gossip is Maple Ridge's unofficial second language, everyone added their own seasoning to the story. Some said Karen had been served legal papers at dawn. Others said the county inspector showed up and left shaking his head. One rumor claimed Mike was an undercover agent taking down HOA corruption nationwide. The truth was simpler. It was 8:11 a.m. when the first city inspector rolled onto Maple Ridge Lane. A little white Prius with a county sticker pulled up to the community square, and a man in a reflective vest got out, clipboard in hand. Most people would have thought nothing of it. But in a neighborhood ruled by the HOA queen herself, the sight of any government official was like spotting a shark fin in a kiddie pool. Karen saw him through her kitchen window and dropped her spoon into her cereal bowl. Milk splashed onto her blouse, but she didn't notice. She bolted for the door and practically jogged across her immaculate lawn, waving like she was greeting a celebrity. "Hello. Good morning," she chirped, voice straining with forced confidence. The inspector blinked at her, confused. Good morning. I'm here for an ADA violation review." Karen froze. That was the first crack. But not the last. Behind her blinds, neighbor after neighbor watched with popcorn-level excitement. You could almost hear the mental notes being taken. Finally something real is happening. Karen tried to regain her composure. "A review? Oh, that must be a misunderstanding." But the inspector wasn't listening. He'd already walked past her and begun surveying the area, starting with the exact spot where Evan's scooter had been confiscated. Within 15 minutes, a second city vehicle arrived, this time from public safety. Then a third one from the county's civil compliance office. 3 vehicles. 3 inspectors. On a Saturday. Maple Ridge had never seen such chaos. Not even during the mailbox color rebellion of 2013. And the funniest part? Mike didn't step outside once. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't gloating. He was inside making pancakes for Evan, flipping them with the casual rhythm of a man who had seen far worse than a clipboard-wielding suburban tyrant. But every now and then, he'd glance out the window. Not scared. Not surprised. Just waiting. Across the street, though, Karen was cracking like cheap patio tile. She marched from inspector to inspector, trying to control the narrative. "This is all blown out of proportion. That scooter was a safety hazard. I am the HOA president, and I can assure you—" "No," one inspector interrupted without even looking up. "You were the HOA president." Karen blinked. Excuse me?" He held up a document. "This notice of internal audit states that no officer under review may act in an official capacity until the investigation concludes." Her jaw fell open. "Oh," the inspector continued, mildly smiling. "And it says here you're the subject of the review." Neighbors nearly fainted from joy. Gary watered his lawn twice just to stay outside long enough to watch. But the meltdown didn't peak until the emergency HOA meeting was called at 11 a.m. Now, for context, HOA meetings were normally held in the community center. A small beige room with bad fluorescent lighting and powdered donuts that tasted like they'd been aging since the Clinton administration. But this time, it was standing room only. People who hadn't shown up to meetings in years came dragging lawn chairs, coolers, even binoculars. When Mike arrived with Evan, the room fell nearly silent. Nearly. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another whispered, "He looks calm." Too calm. Mike took a seat in the back. Evan sat beside him, sipping apple juice and swinging his legs. Karen, however, stood in the front, pacing like a cornered raccoon in pearls. The remaining HOA board members sat stiffly behind a folding table, faces pale and sweaty, like they were waiting for a firing squad. Papers and binders were scattered everywhere. Karen grabbed the microphone. "All right, everyone, let's bring this meeting to." She didn't finish. The inspector from earlier walked right up to the table and placed a thick folder in front of her. "Ms. Pickett," he said, "this is your official list of violations." Karen stared down at the folder. "Violations? Mine?" "Yes," he said cheerfully. 37 of them. 37. The room inhaled so sharply you could have mistaken it for a vacuum cleaner. The inspector continued, flipping through pages. "You exceeded fence height restrictions, substandard porch lighting, unapproved roof tint, illegal use of HOA funds for personal landscaping, and your holiday wreath last December remained up for 94 days beyond regulation." Gasps. Actual gasps. But because her meltdown was still climbing the roller coaster, she snapped back. "Those are small mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes." Mike raised a hand. Without moving his tone above Sunday morning quiet, he said, "You fine my son for a scooter that helps him move." Karen's mouth flapped like a fish. The inspector nodded toward Mike. "And the ADA office has confirmed that the HOA violated federal accommodation guidelines. There will be required restitution." The room broke into murmurs, whispers, stifled laughter. Karen began sweating visibly now. "This is ridiculous. You're all turning against me because of that man." Mike blinked. Evan stared. The room quieted. Karen jabbed a shaking finger in Mike's direction. "He's manipulating the system." "Ma'am," the inspector said. He followed procedure. "You didn't." And that was when it happened. The perfect moment, the storytelling sweet spot, the point where tension and poetic justice wrapped their arms around each other. "That's when I step in with the only call to action you allow." At this point, I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments, hit subscribe if you love poetic justice, and let's see how many of us have survived HOA brutality. And now we return to the firestorm already in progress. The board members called for order. Papers rustled. Someone coughed. Karen tried to regain control, gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles went white. But the board chair cleared his throat. "Ms. Pickett," he said gently, too gently, "we need to vote." "Vote?" she spat. "Vote on what?" The room fell silent. Then the chair said it. "On your removal." It was beautiful. A masterpiece of suburban justice. The kind of moment that, if filmed, would have gotten 1,000,000 views in 24 hours. Karen began shouting, pleading, bargaining, blaming. You could practically see the stages of grief swirling through her in real time. But the vote was swift. Unanimous. The board removed her as HOA president. Her meltdown cracked wide open. She stomped. She shrieked. She accused the inspectors of bias, Evan of being manipulative, Mike of orchestrating a neighborhood coup, and Dale of being a traitor. No one listened. The inspectors walked out calmly. The board adjourned. Neighbors drifted out with satisfied smiles. Mike stood, scooped up Evan's backpack, and took his son's hand. But before he walked out the door, he paused for one beat and looked at Karen. Not with triumph, not with gloating, just quiet disappointment, and somehow that hurt her more. As Mike and Evan stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, like everyone had finally exhaled. But the story wasn't done yet, because what happened later that evening, that letter Mike found waiting on his porch, would change everything again. Justice doesn't always arrive with flashing lights or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it comes on the tread of sensible shoes, carrying a clipboard, and accompanied by the sigh of someone who's seen too many suburban catastrophes caused by people with too much free time. That's exactly what the neighborhood witnessed over the next 48 hours as the avalanche of consequences, carefully, politely set in motion by Mike, finally reached critical mass. But before the full justice unfolded, there was that letter. The one he found on his porch the evening after the HOA meeting. A simple envelope, unperfumed, uncreased, sealed with a shaky hand. Not Karen's trademark aggression. Not the HOA's sterile formatting. Just a plain envelope, addressed in ink that wobbled slightly at the edges. Inside was a typed sheet and a handwritten note at the bottom. Notice of formal restitution. The HOA acknowledges destruction of your son's medical mobility device. Per ADA accommodation guidelines and community liability standards, the HOA is responsible for repair or replacement and associated damages. Handwritten beneath it, "I'm sorry, we didn't know what she was doing. Janice." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even fully honest. Janice absolutely knew. The whole neighborhood knew. But it was the first sign that the HOA realized they had poked a bear who carried clipboards instead of claws. Mike folded the letter, set it gently on the counter, and exhaled. Not relief, just readiness. Morning came quickly after that, and with it a parade of accountability. By 9 a.m., a man with a measuring wheel and county badge arrived to assess damages. He walked the porch, photographed the shattered scooter, interviewed Mike, and took notes with the kind of precision that would make a carpenter jealous. Behind him, a tiny electric cart, ironically the kind the HOA approved for any board member over 65, puttered up. The driver, wearing an insurance company polo, introduced himself as the new HOA's temporary claims adjuster. Temporary, because Karen was no longer part of the HOA, or the neighborhood. She'd left in a huff that morning, packing her SUV full of labeled plastic bins and muttering something about toxic environments. People watched through their blinds, but nobody waved goodbye. Mike explained everything calmly, efficiently. The adjuster nodded more times than he spoke. At the end, he cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Allen will expedite this. We reviewed the footage from your doorbell camera, and, yeah, they were incredibly negligent." He paused. "Also, please know, your son's device qualifies for a complete replacement." "And then some." "And then some?" Mike asked. The adjuster grinned, dazzlingly proud. "We're authorized to upgrade." That got Evan's attention. He was sitting on the porch steps with a juice box, pretending to ignore the adults but listening with the weight of his whole soul. "Upgrade?" he echoed, eyes wide. Mike shot him a playful squint. "Maybe." The adjuster turned his tablet around. "What color does he want?" Evan's breath caught. "Red," he said instantly. "Like Thunderbolt." "Thunderbolt?" the adjuster asked. "That was the scooter's name," Evan explained. The man tapped the screen. "Thunderbolt 2.0 it is." That alone could have ended the saga. The apology, the replacement, the swift justice. But Mike's plan had planted deeper seeds. Seeds that were just beginning to sprout at hilarious angles. Across the street, the HOA board members were filing in and out of Karen's old house, collecting binders, keys, and one board member whispered, "Evidence." Papers were being handed off, signatures exchanged, and everyone wore that exhausting expression of people who had just realized they'd been enabling a tyrant for years. They weren't angry at Mike. They were relieved. Around noon, neighbor Gary sauntered over with a lawn chair slung over one shoulder. "Heard about the new scooter," he said. "Good for you guys. Also, the rumor is Karen tried to argue with the compliance inspector, but she brought the wrong binder and cited rules from the county of Maple Hill, not Maple Ridge." Mike lifted a brow. "Is that even a real county?" "Nope," Gary said cheerfully. She lost the argument in record time. But the real spectacle unfolded at 3 p.m., when the replacement scooter arrived. Not secretly, not quietly. The delivery truck was enormous, too big for the street, too big for the driveways, definitely too big for the HOA guidelines about acceptable vehicle presence. The neighbors gathered instinctively, the way people gather around fireworks or suspiciously cheap yard sales. The truck beeped loudly as it backed up, causing curtains to twitch across the neighborhood. The driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. "I've got a medical equipment delivery," he announced. "For Alan." He opened the back of the truck, and even Mike had to blink. It was beautiful. A sleek, bright red mobility scooter with chrome handlebars, upgraded suspension, extra battery capacity, and a little digital screen at the front that lit up like a spaceship dashboard. Evan gasped so hard he hiccuped. "Thunderbolt 2, he whispered reverently. The driver grinned. "This one's top of the line. Insurance rarely approves something this good. But your case file was intense." There was a moment, just a moment, where Mike thought the victory might end quietly. Then the driver held out the delivery receipt. "You're Karen Pickett, right?" he asked. Mike blinked. "I'm not." "No, but it says here," the driver read, "that the person responsible for delivery acknowledgement is the HOA officer who authorized the damage." He tapped the tablet. "Signature required." Across the street, a dozen neighbors turned, slowly, collectively, toward Karen's old house. The new board members stood frozen in the yard like deer in headlights. And walking stiffly down the driveway, wearing sunglasses indoors and holding a coffee mug like it contained her last shred of dignity, Karen reappeared. Apparently, she had not actually left town. She had simply been hiding. Her sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose as she read the form. Her mouth hung open in a perfect silent scream. "You want me to sign this?" she croaked. "Yes, ma'am," the driver said. "Says here you supervised the removal that caused the damage." The neighbors held their breath. Karen's eyes darted wildly from face to face. "This is harassment. This is a setup. It's your signature or a refusal on record," the driver said calmly. "Either way, it documents responsibility." Karen's finger shook as she scribbled her name. The signature was sloppy, crooked, and aggressive, what you'd expect if anger had been taught cursive. The moment she passed the tablet back, the neighbors applauded. Actual applause. Someone even whistled. Someone else yelled, "That's for Thunderbolt." A kid rang their bicycle bell. Gary did a fist pump. Karen stomped away so hard her shoes sounded like someone slapping a cutting board. Evan climbed onto Thunderbolt 2 with reverent awe. Mike steadied the handlebars while Evan powered it on. The scooter hummed to life, smooth, strong, ready. The sound was like justice with a battery. Neighbors cheered more. Even shy old Mr. Davis waved from his porch. Mike crouched beside his son. "What do you think?" "It's perfect," Evan whispered. And just like that, something heavy eased inside Mike's chest. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need spectacle. He just needed his son to be whole again. And the universe, or at least the insurance company, had taken care of that. Still, the satisfaction wasn't over yet. Later that evening, Mike walked out to his mailbox and found a new letter. This one from the newly restructured HOA board. Inside was a typed statement. Effective immediately, all ADA-compliant mobility devices are fully permitted. Additionally, the HOA will be undergoing mandatory anti-discrimination training. And we sincerely apologize for the distress caused to your family. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "P.S. Your lawn gnome is no longer under review. We actually kind of like him now." Mike smiled. A small, quiet, very real smile. Because even though the fight had been absurd, exhausting, and entirely preventable, the end result wasn't just justice. It was poetic justice, delivered slowly, politely, and with enough irony to satisfy the most seasoned story lover. As the sun dipped low and Thunderbolt 2 zipped slowly down the sidewalk with Evan laughing like he'd swallowed a rainbow, Mike leaned against the porch rail and finally felt peace settle over Maple Ridge again. But little did he know, the aftermath still had one final twist waiting for him. For the first time in weeks, Maple Ridge felt normal again, Or at least the version of normal that exists in a neighborhood where people can't decide whether they love each other, hate each other, or just enjoy spying on each other through semi-closed blinds. But peace, that elusive suburban creature, had returned. Quietly, carefully, cautiously. And the first sign of that peace came the following morning, when the sprinklers turned on at exactly 6:01 a.m., their usual symphony. Click, click hisses. The birds resumed their gossipy chattering in the jacaranda tree. The sun rolled up over the rooftops like it had an appointment to keep. And when Mike stepped outside to breathe in the cool morning air, Thunderbolt 2 was already humming gently on the porch, fully charged and ready for its first full day of freedom. Evan appeared behind him moments later, hair sticking up in chaotic angles, rubbing sleep from his eyes. But when he saw the scooter waiting for him, he lit up like someone plugged him directly into the sunrise. "Can I ride now?" he asked. Mike ruffled his hair. "Let's have breakfast first." "I'm not hungry." "You still have to eat." "But Thunderbolt 2 is hungry," Evan countered dramatically. "For adventure." Even Mike had to laugh at that. It was a good sound, warm, real, something he hadn't heard from himself in a while. The kind of laugh that meant the storm had passed. But while the Allen house was settling into a new rhythm of normal, the rest of Maple Ridge was adjusting too, each in their own peculiar ways. Neighbor Linda walked by that morning carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Brought you a breakfast bake," she said. "I made it last night but realized halfway through I accidentally doubled the cheese. So I figured, who better to bless with my mistakes?" Mike chuckled. "Thank you." "And," she added, lowering her voice like she was sharing government secrets, "I heard Karen's new house doesn't have room for her storage bins. She had to rent a unit." "That so?" Mike asked calmly. "Oh yes," Linda said, eyes gleaming. "And rumor has it, the storage place fined her for leaving bins in the hallway." Sweet justice. But Mike didn't indulge in the gossip. He'd never taken pleasure in someone's misery, even someone as catastrophic as Karen. If anything, he felt something closer to pity. She'd created her own storm, and now she was living in it. Across the street, the newly reconfigured HOA leadership walked door to door handing out pamphlets titled, "Moving Forward with Respect, a New HOA Vision." The pamphlets were printed on recycled paper and featured friendly pastel illustrations. Clearly someone's attempt at repairing the neighborhood's bruised sense of unity. One of the new board members, a quiet man named Bernard, personally handed Mike a copy. "We're trying," Bernard said sheepishly. "Small steps." "I appreciate that," Mike replied. Bernard leaned in. "Also, I want you to know, nobody else wanted Thunderbolt gone. That was all her." Mike nodded. "I know." Bernard sighed. "We just didn't know how to stop her." That, Mike thought, was probably the saddest truth of all. So much of what had happened could have been prevented if anyone, had simply said, "Enough." But people didn't. Because sometimes pettiness masquerades as authority. And sometimes authority, when wrapped in a rules binder, looks scarier than it is. Later that afternoon, Mike took Evan for a slow ride around the neighborhood. Thunderbolt 2 glided smoothly along the sidewalk, humming like it was pleased to be alive. Neighbors waved. Some clapped. A few shouted compliments. "That's a fine-looking scooter. Love the red. Is it faster than the old one?" But it was when they reached the community square that the real moment happened. Sitting in the center of the square, under the shade of the large oak tree, was a long wooden bench. A new one, and on it was a silver plaque that read, "In honor of every child who just needs a little help getting around. Maple Ridge believes in you." Evan read it aloud slowly, carefully, then turned to his dad. "Is that for me?" Mike shook his head. "It's for anybody like you, now or later." "But I inspired it." Mike smiled softly. "You did." That was when Evan grinned so wide Mike worried his face might split in half. It wasn't about the scooter anymore. It wasn't about the fines or the rules or the petty drama. It was about dignity, community, the kind of small kindness that actually changed something. Even the neighbors, those same ones who had watched the chaos unfold from behind blinds, began to rebuild in small ways. People offered to help repaint fences. Someone offered to host a barbecue to bring the community back together. And old Mr. Davis, who hadn't spoken more than 5 words to anyone in years, shuffled out of his house to say, "Nice work, kid," before retreating like a cautious tortoise. But as peaceful as everything seemed, Mike still had one final loose end to tie up. It happened a few evenings later. Mike was taking out the trash when he noticed a small car parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. The lights were off, but he recognized the silhouette instantly. Stiff shoulders, square chin, hair that still screamed authority. Karen stepped out slowly, almost defensively, like she expected the neighborhood to boo her. She walked toward Mike with hesitant steps. He waited, calm as ever. "Mr. Allen," she said, clutching her purse like a riot shield. "Karen," she inhaled shakily. "I came to say, I'm sorry." Now, Karen didn't look like the type to apologize. She looked like the type to argue with a brick wall. But in that moment, she seemed smaller, less rigid, almost exhausted by her own rigidity. Mike nodded once. "Thank you." She swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt your boy." "Intent doesn't undo impact," Mike replied gently. Karen looked down at the asphalt. "I know, and I lost everything over it. My position, my reputation, Mike interrupted. "You didn't lose anything you didn't give away." That hit her harder than anything else. She nodded, eyes glassy. "I understand." Mike didn't hate her. He didn't forgive her, not fully. But he understood something she didn't. Pettiness is a prison. And Karen had been its warden and longest-standing inmate. "I hope you find more peace where you're going," he said. She gave a small, broken nod, then hurried back to her car and drove away. Not with drama, not with threats, just fading out of Maple Ridge like a storm cloud finally drifting past the horizon. Mike exhaled, then walked back to the house. Evan was waiting inside, coloring a picture of Thunderbolt 2 under a rainbow. "Dad?" he asked. "Everything okay?" Mike nodded. "Everything's fine." And it was. That night, as the porch light glowed softly and Thunderbolt 2 charged for the next day's adventures, the neighborhood settled into a newfound quiet. Not the brittle, fake quiet enforced by fines and rules. A real quiet, peaceful one. And that's when Mike realized something. Neighborhoods aren't made of houses. They're made of people. Flawed, funny, stubborn people who sometimes forget how to be decent, and sometimes remember it in the most unexpected ways. As he watched Evan roll circles in the living room, laughing freely, Mike leaned against the counter and said aloud, more to himself than anyone, "So if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine, remember, you can't control the petty, but you can outsmart it." And in Maple Ridge, at least for now, that was more than enough.